So I'm kind of feeling a little, you know, lost and confused with, learning how to do all this video stuff. So I thought I might read to you from one of my favorite short stories, writer of short stories, Franz Kafka. Sometimes I just get bored and pick one of these books out and read from it. So I thought I'd share with you on parables. Many complain that the words of the wise are always merely parables, and of no use in daily life, which is the only life we have. When the sage says, "Go over," he does not mean that we should cross to some actual place, which we could do anyhow if the labor were worth it. He means some fabulous yonder, something unknown to us, something he cannot designate more precisely either, and therefore cannot help us here in the very least. All these parables really set out to say merely that the incomprehensible is incomprehensible, and we know that already, but the cares we have to struggle with every day, that's a different matter. Concerning this, a man once said, "Why such reluctance? If you only followed the parables, you yourself would become parables, and with that rid yourselves of all your daily cares." Another said, I bet that's also a parable." Then the first said, "You have won." Then the second replied, "But unfortunately, only in parable." To which the first said, "No, in reality, in parable you have lost." Now I'm going to read for you two pieces of criticism I found on the internet concerning this very short story by Kafka, so that you can see a couple of the different ways this could be interpreted. The first of which gets to kind of the root of the words that Kafka uses, or specifically the word he uses more often than any other is parable. At least that's the way it's rendered in English. You can certainly wonder about the German, but Geoff Klock, a doctor of philosophy at Oxford University, he writes, "Parables are a major part of Christianity. Jesus expresses his message through parables, but they are double-edged. In Mark 4:11 through 12, Jesus says, 'Unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables, that seeing that they may see and not perceive, and hearing that they may hear and not understand, lest at any time they should be converted and their sins should be forgiven them.'" Read and reread that passage. Read and reread that passage. You will continue to bump your head against Jesus, clearly saying that there are people who should not be saved, whose sins should not be forgiven. He speaks in parables specifically to keep these people in the dark. Parables are to explain, but also to obscure. They are supposed to express the inexpressible and to be of help in daily life, but the inexpressible is of no help in daily life. This is what made Kafka's read and reread that passage. You will continue to bump your head. Take 5. Read and reread that passage. You will continue to bump your head against Jesus, clearly saying that there are people who should not be saved, whose sins should not be forgiven, and that he speaks in parables specifically to keep these people in the dark. Parables are to explain, but also to obscure. They are supposed to express the inexpressible and to be of help in daily life, but the inexpressible is of no help in daily life. This is what Kafka is interested in here. To win in parable is to express the inexpressible. To win life is to make the parable useful. These are clearly at odds, but intended to be by those who write parables connected. Kafka, in looking at the relationship between life and literature, rebukes the connection and keeps them at odds. Make use of literature and you lose its mystery. Keep the mystery and you lose practical application. And of course, for Kafka, there is no way to solve the problem. Either way, you lose. Read and reread that passage. You will continue to bump your head against Jesus, clearly saying that there are people who should not be saved, whose sins should not be forgiven, and that he speaks in parables specifically to keep these people in the dark. Parables are to explain, but also to obscure. They are supposed to express the inexpressible and to be of help in daily life, but the inexpressible is of no help in daily life. This is what Kafka is interested in here. To win in parable is to express the inexpressible. To win life is to make the parable useful. These are clearly at odds, but intended to be by those who write parables connected. Kafka, in looking at the relationship between life and literature, rebukes the connection and keeps them at odds. Make use of literature and you lose its mystery. Keep the mystery and you lose practical application. And of course, for Kafka, there is no way to solve the problem. Either way, you lose. While it is, obviously important to look at the, face of the story that Kafka presents here, and look at the words and perhaps the references that he drops. Um, uh, you know, uh, Geoff Glock takes kind of a superficial view, looking really only at the facade of what Kafka is really saying, which is also why I like this next piece of analysis from J. Nathan Matthias at rubberpaw.com. He writes that if we believe Kafka, then all the words of the wise are indeed useless. The sages of this world are telling us about things that, while they might be real in some cases, do not really help us. We don't even know if the sages understand what they're talking about, and even if they do, they cannot communicate it, and we cannot comprehend them. If we believe Kafka, well, we probably ought to give it all up. Of course, Kafka may not have been talking about other people. Some have posed that On Parables is a meta-parable key to Kafka's own writings. According to this view, Kafka's own words are always merely parables and of no use in daily life. This may be the case for Kafka, rarely designates clearly what he means. He writes ambiguously using stories, pictures, and parables. It is indeed true that many complain that this about his writings. In their frustration, others try to insert their own meaning into his words. It is possible that Kafka wrote on parables as a reply to those who would too greatly hate or love his writings, letting them in on a secret. It's all useless, incomprehensible, or not worth the labor. On Parables is one of Kafka's best short works. It demonstrates his depth of thought, whimsy, and despair. It also covers many of the main themes that recur throughout his work. Themes about the nature of truth, the knowability of truth, the way of salvation, the relevance of wisdom to life, and the despair of recognizing the incomprehensible. It may be the key to understanding the ambiguous nature of his other works. It certainly provides an exhortation to think twice next time before merely accepting something, even Kafka's own writing, just because the story is compelling. I do really enjoy both those interpretations for different reasons, although the first one takes a little bit longer to get to the same point that the second one kind of takes for granted, which is that beyond the obvious absurdity with the two conflicts between practicality and imagination, there is another place that you can take this parable, and I really enjoy where what's his name? Geoff, no, that's the other one. Nathan Matthias, takes it looking at Kafka's work and analyzing the parable within that respect. But I have to say that also I wouldn't want to just strictly look at this story in a way that references Kafka as an author. I would also just like to enjoy the story, for the interaction that it has between the the text and the reader, and the conclusions that you can draw just by experiencing the way these words kind of roll around inside of your head, and then after that the conclusions that you can draw are certainly numerous. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something a little bit new about Kafka and a little bit about storytelling and the way that works, and I hope you'll come back real soon.